was definitely the high point of my life. It's a roller coaster. Like, some of the worst days of your life happen in Peace Corps, but some of the best days happen too. And on the balance, it's such a ride. Yeah, the last 20 years have been like the aftermath, just living out the epilogue. I really enjoyed that, which motivated me to become a peer leader for Volunteer Maryland. And that year was wild, off nice and slow, and then everything blew up, and it was still a great year. And for the next few years at Volunteer Maryland as staff, I got to watch so many members go through their year and see what they brought to it and see what they took away from it and everything they learned and everything they experienced.
We're back with another AmeriCorps Connections podcast interview with another AmeriCorps alum, but we have a very special series that is happening right now. We have Thomas Darnell with us, and he is a dual, I guess triple, but dual service stream member. He did Peace Corps, and he also did actually 2 services of AmeriCorps National Service. So we're going to hear all about his story and what all of that means and who is this Thomas Darnell person. Before we get started, of course, like always, thank you so much, Dan Medevere from Time or Money Services, for getting this podcast up and running on all of the platforms, everywhere that you're listening to this audio-wise. Dan was the lead on that. And Sharon Tewksbury Bloom from Do Good, Be Good Consulting. Thank you so much for all of the back end support and everything that your all AmeriCorps alum team are doing to support this podcast. It's been really fun and helpful. So without further ado, I want to just jump right in. We're doing this special series highlighting dual service. And so we're looking at AmeriCorps members or AmeriCorps alumni who are also Peace Corps alumni. And Thomas, do you want to explain to us the difference between Peace Corps and AmeriCorps? And then what the heck? How did you get started with all of this?
Sure. So Peace Corps was initiated back in the early 60s under President Kennedy. It is 2 years of service in a foreign country. For my service, I was in Mali from 2002 to 2004. I lived in a remote farming village where there was no electricity, no running water. I had to learn the local language. I had to learn to do everything right. You have to learn it all. That's 2 years of service in that environment. AmeriCorps, for me, my Vista year was in Baltimore. I was placed with Johns Hopkins University Center for Educational Outreach, which is the engineering school. And I was mostly serving with the city schools, the Baltimore City Public Schools, with their competitive robotics for middle schoolers. So totally different environment.
I was also in the United States in Baltimore,
Yep.
Maryland, not in Mali.
Yep. And AmeriCorps always serves in the United States. Peace Corps never does, which is
Peace Corps is the international AmeriCorps.
That's for all of you people who know exactly what AmeriCorps is and never heard of Peace Corps. It is the international equivalent of AmeriCorps.
So I'm gonna pause you real quick right there. I know. So for those of you that don't know, actually Thomas and I have worked together for, I don't know, we worked together for 4 years. I think when you were an AmeriCorps member and then when you started working with Volunteer Maryland. So I know his story, and I'm also going to force him to tell us more details about his story. So I want to go, before we move into your AmeriCorps service year, let's take a pause real quick and just hang out with your Peace Corps year. How did you find out about the Peace Corps opportunity? And I also want to say thank you so much for giving us the historical reference of Peace Corps.
I was actually watching a stupid TV show where a character said that they had served in the Peace Corps, and that's where they got all these crazy practical kind of spy skills. And I was like, honestly, I thought it was just for hippies, right? So I was like, maybe that is possible. And that week I went and printed off the application because you had to do that. So it was like that thick. And I just started filling it out, and it probably took me a couple months, and I sent it out to Peace Corps. And it was just one of those, I have no idea what I'm going to do after college. This was my senior year. And I was like, that seems like a decent decent iron to have in the fire.
Mhm.
Once I thought about it, but I never would have thought about it without seeing that stupid show, which is weird. But so it's like it might have changed at this point, but it's about a year-long process to apply. There's a lot of back and forth. You have to get some medical checks and all this stuff. And then, so I was working at a sugar refinery and I got the call that they wanted to set up an interview. And I was like, I'm not that far from Chicago because I'm from Michigan. Let's do it in person. Let's do it on September the 11th. This was 2001. So we decided to make a thing of it. So my parents and I and my best friend road trip down to Chicago together. And we're hearing all the news on the radio as we're heading down. And by the time we got to Chicago, like everything was shut down. And I called the recruiter on the phone and he was like, yeah, I can get you in. Hold on. Building was closed, but he got me and my dad in to do the interview, which was funny. But I'd been looking at doing something in like Central Asia, and he's like, yeah, those programs are closed. And I was like, what's the first thing that's available? And he said, French speaking West Africa. And I was like, sure. So,
Sweet.
see, yeah. And yeah, so it was 4 months I was in country.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And
So
like you can't like you have to like pack a backpack, right? It's not, oh, I'm gonna make sure I bring my carrying machine and my toiletries. I gotta make sure like how much stuff were you able to bring with you?
2 pieces of stowaway luggage. It
Okay.
was, yeah, it wasn't a ton. And there's a lot of stuff that was going to be useless, like anything that you plug in or anything like that is just like you're better off trying to find it in Mali if, but yeah, it was mostly just clothes and books, that kind of stuff. That's all I brought.
Stoicism, philosophy books. You get to Mali, you land. What's the experience like? Okay, like now you're here, you're doing this Peace Corps thing. Was there a sign that said Thomas Darnell Peace Corps and then there was a group of people, or what was the experience once you landed and to get to your site, maybe?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that is where I first read Marcus Aurelius was in Peace Corps. So so you all start as a cohort. There's 2 cohorts each year, and we call them stages in French-speaking countries. So our stage was, so we were the winter start. So agricultural and natural resource management were the 2 sectors. I was natural resource management. And so we all started together. So first we had the 2-day staging, they called it, in Philadelphia. And they just broadly introduced us to the concepts that we were about to deal with and gave us like our first round of shots and stuff. You get a lot of shots. Our first anti-malarials. And yeah, so you have your staging, then you all fly on the same flight. It was Air France. So you get into Paris, hang out there for about 12 hours until there's a flight to Mali. And you take the flight to Mali. And Peace Corps is there to pick you up with a vehicle that it's a small bus that can take 30 plus people. No problem there, although it's a third world airport. It was pretty hectic. And I I remember starting to wonder what I got myself into around that point,
Yeah.
especially our drive to the training site. We're driving, it's dark out now, and we're driving around and all these people are hanging out outside and they have like little campfires going, which was really they the like boil tea just as a social thing. So it was like largely their little grills for boiling tea, but anytime. Yeah,
Okay.
the most common one is right after lunch, like right between lunch and like siesta time.
Yeah, I was gonna
But
say it sounds siesta-esque.
yeah, but anytime. And if you're ever boiling tea, you're gonna have a lot of friends for a short period of
That's
time.
cool.
Yeah. So Yep, we're going through town, and if I went through an American city and all I saw was like hundreds of people outside sitting around fires, you're like, oh man, this is not the place I want to be at night. So you have that feeling, and it's just people don't want to be inside. Like it's nice and cool outside at night. It's still warm from the day inside, so it's just a different way of living, but it's it definitely made an impact on me when I first got there. I was like, oh, this is like actually going to be a challenge. This isn't like one of those everybody thinks it's a challenge, but I'm going to skate through. So yeah, that kind of carried through. We have a 3-month training in country. So we're not sworn in as volunteers yet. We go into a training, we're learning cross-cultural stuff, we're learning
Mm.
French, we're learning Bambara, we're learning our technical area, like natural resource management. So learning how to like graft trees or grow them from the seed in some cases, or at a certain point we learned beekeeping.
Wow.
So all of that training was packed into 3 months. And then you're also like bonding with your cohort, your stage, you
So
know.
you have an arc where you get there and you don't know what to expect. And then it's like the realization that, oh, okay, this is actually really different than what I was expecting. And then they create this training kind of cohort training atmosphere where, okay, let's acclimate you. Let's make sure that you all know each other and everything. Let's get to the meat of your service. Let's move into you've gotten past the point of, okay, I'm here. Like maybe month 6. Like what did month 6 look like? And then what did month 18 look like? I can imagine that those from the time that you landed and you were on the bus, going past these campfires, going, okay, so tease the thing at any time of the day. What did, once you got into the meat of your work, what did that 6-month experience look like?
Yeah, I'll say up until Christmas the first year. So
Mm.
we swore in the middle of April at the end of our training, and then we basically went straight to our sites. And my language skills were not great. I was okay in French, but most of my villagers weren't. So I had to learn Bambara, which was it took time. It takes time for everybody. The people who learned it best got in a relationship with a Malian, but I didn't do that. So my language skills always suffered. So around Christmas time, I traveled and visited some friends around the country, and my one friend I stayed with had two really good friends that were villagers who were around his age. Nobody around my age lived in my village, because they were all going to Ivory Coast to work on plantations and stuff. That was like the age that you just go for 5 years and try to make a bunch of money. But he had a couple friends that were around our age, and like it was so fun. We went out hunting with one shotgun with two shells that we weren't going to use because they were too expensive. So we're like using like throwing sticks and stuff. It was Yeah, and I probably learned more Bambara just because we actually had stuff to talk about that wasn't
Mm.
like really immediate and important and obvious, and because of
Yeah.
that. And also we just explored so much of the area around his village. I was like, nothing's stopping me from doing that in my village. So that was around the time I stopped waiting for the experience to come to me, and I started going
Yeah.
out. And so I walked through my village all the time, and I greeted everybody. We didn't talk about a lot, but we stopped and chatted and let them know I existed, and all my people
I
had peace,
I
as we
think that
say.
I would you say all what? Your people.
All my people had peace. That would be a
What is it? Can you elaborate? What does that
Yeah,
mean
so
for us
so
common folk?
yeah, so for Malians, greeting isn't, hey, how's it going? Great. It's okay. How did you sleep last night? How's your work
Mm.
going? How's your wife? How's your kids? How's your parents? How's your home village? How casually, it might just be like a few of those things, but it can be a lot too. So a lot of times like peace is an important concept here. So you say peace is at them, peace is there. Another thing you could say is no troubles. Darate.
Mm.
That was an interesting one in my village, because that's the standard for Bambara is like darate. Like, how's everything going? Darate. But in my village, women said that, men said herebe. So when I went trying to say Torote, everybody's laughing at me. So yeah, so Herabe is there's peace.
So the what I was going to point out, I think there's a time I can't speak for a Peace Corps experience, but I can speak to AmeriCorps experience where there is that moment where sometimes projects aren't very clear and it's like we need this thing done, but we don't know how to get it done. And the first couple of weeks or months, you're like, I don't know how to get it done. And then you just sit back and you go, you know what? I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to go in this direction until somebody tells me to go into a different direction. It sounds like that experience where you went off with your friends, there was a little bit less of like a responsibility to come in here and do this thing, but more of a, okay, like I'm going to be here for a certain amount of time. And what was the one thing that I would always say? You can do anything for a service year. That was
Mhm.
like my mantra, right? I was like, you can do anything for a service year, just get them done. So
That's
it
gotten
sounds
me
like
through a lot.
it's scary. It sounds like you hit that. And so what changed when you went back to the village? It sounds like you started to make connections with folks. What changed in the work that you were meant to do as a Peace Corps member? Like, how did that kind of blossom into like the project that you were working on?
Yeah, so a, a couple of big picture things about the way Peace Corps is structured. It was always like the plan was to have 4 volunteers in a row. So 8 years of Peace Corps volunteers.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
And
that.
the first one is they may not really have a lot of useful skills, but they're they're like tough enough to endure the fact that nobody understands why they're there, and they're able to make connections and just set the stage for people to come later. Yeah, I'd walk through the village, I'd greet people, I'd stop and talk to them. I started going out into the fields around the village, which was really cool because one, it's just cool. It's like going on a hike, but also you run into people when they're out farming in their fields or they're out herding their cattle and they're really excited to see you. And they always invite me to be part of what they're doing. You want to help me herd my cattle a little bit? Sure. I like you don't do anything. You just stand around while the cattle mill around. But yeah, and so I had a decent idea of where a lot of my villagers farmed as well as where they lived in the village. So that was the main thing I was meant to be doing was canvassing, laying the groundwork, creating relationships, and also a broad goodwill that would be useful to people who came after me. Also, I assisted other volunteers on projects like digging soap pits, digging wells, women's garden, mud ovens,
S-
just a lot of like low kind of basic level Peace Corps stuff.
So did you go in there and take a scope of, okay, what is the landscape here and what are some of the things that we can make the standard of living just a little bit better? And I also want to take a caveat here where we've heard of the concept of the savior persona
Yeah.
of us Westerners to come into lands and say, let me help you with your, and that's not what we're talking about here, folks. Like the Peace Corps program was really meant for folks to go into these areas. Even though Thomas is like, I don't know what was going on, you still had to live among the people, with the people, for the people, doing the things that the people need. So we're talking about with and alongside and not like doing service to a group of people. So just wanted to make sure we reframe that lens that like we're not, Peace Corps is not coming in there saying, let me tell you how you should live your life, but let's just make things a little, we know we have these skills that we can make things a little bit easier for you and we can show you how to do it if that's what you. So it sounds like you had to take like this step back and go, where are the areas that we can make things a little bit easier and better? So where did you end up from the time that you took the scope where it's such a great story where it was like I went in, I didn't know the language, and then I went on this, oh, it's like the hero's journey. And then you had to go down under, and then you met your friends, and then you came back up and you bonded with the villagers, and then you took a step back and you were like, here are the projects that we can do and work with other volunteers. What do you think that the biggest impact that you left on that village? And you were there for 2 years? Yeah.
Mhm. Yep.
So what do you think that the biggest impact was that you left from that village? And then
Um,
what was the biggest impact on you?
Yeah, I'm sure the biggest impact I left was they had this crazy foreign white guy live with them for 2 years, and like endless stories to tell about how weird that guy was. Didn't I didn't pray with them, and I'm not a Muslim.
Did you have your guitar though?
I did.
That
Yep.
was probably helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I played a few blues licks there was a time, so part of my fence came down. It was mud brick wall, and the villagers all came over to help me fix it. I was just getting in their way, but everybody was chilling out, taking a break, and I played guitar for him for about 10 minutes or something. Yeah. But yeah, so it was, there's definitely a lot of things became easier to navigate as the time went on. The biggest impact I had at the time was I helped paint a mural at the school. So it was a map of Mali with the climate zones in it.
Okay.
So that was like the biggest, like tangible impact I had in my village.
And
Um,
what do you think that you walked away with?
yeah, I don't even know where to start. Probably the biggest thing is I think that growing up, so I was an army brat until I was almost 8. So we moved from place to place, and my goal was always like, how quickly can I become a member of this group? And
Mm,
in like college, I really struggled because like most of those people were not the kind of people that I was generally looking to be engaged with, and vice versa. And I had that, I was carrying that in my heart as I went to Peace Corps, that I'd been in this place where I really didn't fit. And then I get to this place where there's zero hope of ever actually fitting in. It doesn't matter how much I master, I'm always going to be different. I'm always going to be the outsider.
yes.
And
There's
and
a bit
that,
of freedom, like there's a bit of freedom
yeah,
with that, right?
yeah. And it really helped me embrace that outsider. If you want to have more perspective on things and be more objective, like that's the way to do it, is to be the outsider. And so you go back to my own community back in Michigan, I'm like, I'm an outsider. And you start to
Mm.
see everything. And anywhere in America, it's always, oh, so this is how they do things here. And you start looking at things that you would never question otherwise. As I'm sure a lot of people at Volunteer Maryland encountered with me commenting about Maryland.
Everybody in Maryland is like this.
Mm,
That was Thomas's sweeping statement. Everybody in Maryland. We're like, what about us? But
so,
that is such a good perspective. I love that you were able, and thank you for sharing because that seems a little vulnerable. Of yeah, I've always felt like an outsider, and then I was a true person coming from the outside, and you just embrace it and realize that. And what a wonderful gift that through a service with Peace Corps can help fill that like hole or that void in somebody where it's okay. Now I've truly experienced what it feels like and how I want to go forward. So moving out of your Peace Corps year, I want to just capture anything else that you feel like you took from that service year and anything that you feel like was an impact that you left behind. I want to make sure that we cover all of that.
yeah, I imagine that there's some stories I told that sounded like tall tales that some of my villagers remember and like to retell. It was it was definitely the high point of my life. It's a roller coaster. Like some of the worst days of your life happen in Peace Corps, but some of the best days happen too. And on the balance, it's such a ride. Yeah, the last 20 years have been like the aftermath, just living out the epilogue. But
That's great.
I can't express how much gratitude I'd have for my villagers on like everything. They ushered me into adulthood in a foreign culture, basically. So, yeah.
That's really special. Thank you for that. Wow. Okay, so I don't know if we can cover your Vista and national service or state and national in 10 minutes. So you came home from your Peace Corps year and you just couldn't get enough. What was your transition from Peace Corps into your next service year?
Yeah. So first I'll say that I served with people in Peace Corps who had done AmeriCorps beforehand as like a
Oh,
preparation. And I also served with people who, to help ease their transition back into American culture, did some AmeriCorps after. So they're both great options. For me, I decided to go to grad school for some reason. This is one of those problems with being isolated from like the common sense of your home culture and just rolling with a groupthink kind of situation. So a lot of people wanted to go to grad school because they had always wanted to go to grad school, and Peace Corps was part of that. For me, I was like, yeah, grad school, I could do that. I didn't like college too much, but hey. So I did grad school for several years. I soured on it and wasn't at all sure where to go from there. Um, I knew some people in grad school with their degree, they ended up going into nonprofit work. I thought maybe nonprofit work's the thing. And then I started thinking about how I knew people who'd done AmeriCorps. I started looking into AmeriCorps. Eventually, I settled on Washington, D.C. as a city where I knew enough people that I might actually have a life if I moved there. All the cool things that come up when you look for Washington, D.C. are in Baltimore. So I found my position as robotics coordinator, and that was in Baltimore. We had a similar cohort, around 30 people. They were all straight out of college, except for me and a couple other people, which on the one hand, I really loved the service I was doing with STEM, middle school robotics, all that, getting to know Baltimore, understanding the community, traveling back and forth all over the city on public transit because I didn't have a car. And at the same time, I was dealing with all these kids who now they're in their 30s. But yeah, but at the time, 22, 23, and just helping them, like mentor them a little bit on some of the realities of life once you're out on your own in a strange place without any money. I really enjoyed that, which motivated me to become a peer leader for Volunteer Maryland. And that year was wild, off nice and slow, and then everything everything blew up, and it was but great. It was still a great year. And for the next few years at Volunteer Maryland as staff, I got to watch so many members go through their year and see what they brought to it and see what they took away from it and everything they learned and everything they experienced. So now I work at the Washington State AmeriCorps Commission, the State Service Commission, and help support state national programs all across the state. I really appreciate being in a role where I can give real valuable support to programs that do what we used to do. Yeah, it was for me, it was learning that I had things to offer the world that I'd never really considered. And also that things about me that the world had seemed to not be interested in,
hmm
the world might actually be interested in those things. It just didn't know how to tell me.
the universe and Thomas were not speaking the same language. But I want to make sure with your story. So the Vista year you did Johns Hopkins and you worked on those on the projects, the STEM projects and robotics. And then you came over to Volunteer Maryland where you were a peer leader. And for folks that don't understand what that means, basically Thomas had like half of the cohort and I was the director, was a program manager at the time. Maybe, I don't know, I can't remember what I was. It was a blur. But Thomas had like half of the cohort that a cohort of 30 that he was responsible of making sure that they got to their site, that they were doing what they needed to do, that if they were about to have a mental breakdown, like Thomas was like, okay, can we help you with that? So he really was spending time with 15 AmeriCorps members that were like in the field. So I really think that you took your experience from Peace Corps and your excitement from Vista and you poured it into your position with Volunteer Maryland and was really you acted really calmly as a guide and a support for the for half of for the whole cohort and you poured into the staff as well. And during Thomas's service year, kind of Volunteer Maryland imploded, exploded sort of thing. There was leadership change, and we found ourselves with no staff. And I was director at the time. And so Thomas and his counterpart, what's her name?
Annie.
Annie, yes. We were like, all hands on deck. Let's make this happen. We have 30 AmeriCorps members out on the field, and let's just not let them see us sweat. So we made sure that we carried that cohort over the line while we were also ushering in a new group, and worlds collided, and Thomas was able to join the Volunteer Maryland staff as I think it was associate something. I don't know. You did something with finances, and which I think you still do now. So that's great.
Operations.
Operations. Yes, he was like the operations guy. But all of that to say, like, what I want to say for this series and this overall picture is that, like, moving through the different aspects of service. So Peace Corps, which is in a different country, in a different culture, and then coming back to, and I like what you said, how some folks from Peace Corps used AmeriCorps to assimilate back into the American kind of way, which I can imagine can be a little bit just discombobulating when you're coming in from where you were serving before. But all of that to say is that, like, the development of where you are now on this shady west coast of Washington State, which is a perfect environment for Thomas. Just if y'all, I hope that you follow Thomas on social media, or I don't even know if you have social media, but follow him on LinkedIn. The Washington State's a perfect place for him. But everything that you're able to bring from your experience, and I like what you said about supporting organizations that did what Volunteer Maryland did and continue to do the work in the service. And it's so important. And we don't know why we're going through those experiences. We don't know why I'm asking you to write a budget that you've never even seen before and come to me with, I don't know, figure it out. And now you're looking at budgets, and now you can come from that eagle's perch of, I've been there, done that, let me help. And so it's a great just story in and of itself. And I commend you for taking the chance and doing the things and following the pebbles as they lay.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely, definitely your influence was very inspirational along the way. If you're gonna throw one of those at me, I'm gonna throw one of those back.
Well, I wasn't looking for, but I'll take it. That's great. I know that we're all in this together, and that's what it's all about. So the purpose for this series is really to show the alignment and the congruence. Is congruent side by side? That's parallel. What's congruent this way?
Congruence is two things are similar.
Okay, so the congruency, thank you. Thomas would also come in with words that I didn't understand. I had to look them up. But the congruence between Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. And recently, the CEO, Michael Smith, has announced the partnership with Peace Corps and AmeriCorps for recruitment. For what it's worth, this little tiny podcast that I've been putting together and is now a year and a half, we're almost at 100 episodes. Hopefully you guys can get some inspiration to serve in either Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. But as we wrap up, Thomas, I want to leave it in your lap to say, what are your biggest takeaways? What do you want people to know? If somebody's considering a Peace Corps year, what are some of the things they might be afraid of that you're like, yeah, but you'll be okay? When you're looking at an AmeriCorps year, what are some of the things to either look for? I don't know, words of wisdom.
Yeah, and with regards to Peace Corps, they take very good care of you. They make sure that you're going to be in a safe situation. So they're very concerned about the safety of their volunteers. So I would say that I wouldn't let that stand in your way as much as you might. For AmeriCorps, I would just say that, and probably with Peace Corps, is don't let your preconceived notion about who does that get you to make a decision not to do it as well. Like, you have to make your own place in the world, and that includes making Peace Corps your own, making AmeriCorps your own. So yeah, I think that I know a lot of programs in Washington that would love to have anybody listening serve as a member with them. So don't think it's not you.
I love that. Yep. I served as an AmeriCorps member in my mid-30s, early 30s. It's not a 20-something-year-old thing anymore. In fact, AmeriCorps is working really hard to make it not that. Thomas, thank you so much for taking your time. And folks, I totally solicited this conversation. I was like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And he knows this podcast has been going on. I was like, I'm doing this thing. So I appreciate this is not a sweet spot for Thomas. He's not happy with being out in front of everybody. But I just think your story is great for folks to hear. And now that you're at the State Service Commission for Washington, I just think it's a full picture. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for listening. And we'll be back with another AmeriCorps Connections podcast with an AmeriCorps alum that is a dual service alum between Peace Corps and AmeriCorps. So in the meantime, make sure that you call your congressperson and tell them that we need to continue to fund AmeriCorps so we can continue producing alumni that are doing great things. So thanks so much. Have a good one.